Caleb Whitfield was 38 years old, and for 10 years he had been the invisible engine behind someone else's dream. He worked doubles while his wife studied. He cooked. He sacrificed. He quietly shelved his own architectural license so Nadine could become a doctor. He never once asked for credit. He just believed in them. On the morning his wife received her medical license, Caleb pressed his best shirt, bought her a single white orchid, and sat in a hospital atrium ready to celebrate everything they had built together. She slid a manila envelope across the table instead. Divorce papers, filed that same morning, before the ceremony. While Caleb was parking the car, she was already ending the marriage. She looked at him and said they simply wanted different things now. What she didn't know, what she never once thought to ask, was what Caleb had already been building in the dark. And in 3 years, she would find out exactly what that was. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Through the pre-dawn darkness of Memphis, Caleb Whitfield sat hunched over his drafting table. The soft scratch of pencil against paper, the only sound in the quiet house. His fingers moved with practiced precision across the community development plans, a mixed-use project that could transform a neglected stretch of South Memphis. The drawings were meticulous, reflecting years of professional training that now only emerged in these stolen morning hours. At 38, Caleb carried himself with a steady warmth that made him instantly trustworthy to others. His architectural license, earned at 27 through years of disciplined study, now gathered dust while he managed other people's construction projects. It wasn't the path he'd imagined, but it provided the stable income needed to fund Nadine's long journey through medical school. He glanced at his watch, 6:47 a.m. Soon, Nadine would be awake. With careful movements, he rolled up the drawings and tucked them away in their tube. The morning ritual began. Coffee brewing, breakfast preparations, a pristine white orchid positioned at the center of the kitchen table. Each element precise, considered, like the structural supports he could see in any building he studied. The sound of movement upstairs made him pause. Nadine appeared moments later, already fully dressed in crisp professional attire. Makeup perfect. She hadn't needed his help getting ready in years. "Coffee's ready," he said warmly. "And I made you some toast." "Thanks," she replied, the word falling flat like an afterthought. Her eyes caught the orchid, and she gave a slight nod. The same perfunctory acknowledgement one might give a server refilling water. The drive to the hospital passed in a familiar pattern. Nadine spoke continuously about her upcoming attending schedule, about Dr. Brent Calloway's research department, about a promising apartment listing in Midtown. Caleb listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions at all the right moments. She never once asked about his day ahead, or the projects he was managing. The hospital atrium buzzed with excitement as staff gathered for the licensing ceremony. Caleb stood quietly at the edges, watching as Nadine worked the room with practiced charm. When she introduced him to colleagues, it was always the same. "This is my husband," said with the slight downward inflection of completing a social obligation. He smiled and shook hands, his warmth genuine despite the dismissal wrapped in those 3 words. After the ceremony, they found a quiet corner table in the atrium. Nadine's composure was perfect as she reached into her bag and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the table's surface with deliberate movement. "I filed these this morning," she said, her voice steady and practiced. "I think we both know this marriage has run its course. We've grown in different directions, want different things. I hope we can handle this transition maturely." Caleb stared at the divorce papers, his architect's mind automatically noting how the morning light from the atrium's high windows fell across the manila surface, creating sharp shadows along its edges. 10 years of marriage reduced to legal documents, filed before she'd even received her license. His voice remained level when he finally spoke, though something deep inside him shifted like settling foundation stones. Was any of it real? Nadine's response came smooth and rehearsed, like a diagnosis delivered to a difficult patient. Of course it was real, Caleb. We just want different things now. He studied her face. The same face he'd watched across countless breakfast tables, the same features he'd supported through every exam and setback. But now he saw it with an architect's eye for structural integrity, and he recognized what had been there all along, a facade with nothing behind it. Without another word, he reached for the white orchid he'd placed between them. His fingers curled around its delicate stem, then released. He left it there on the table, a solitary marker of everything he'd given that she'd never truly seen. As he walked out of the atrium, his footsteps echoed against the polished floor. Each step carried him away from a decade spent building someone else's dream, while his own gathered dust in pre-dawn hours. After leaving the hospital atrium, Caleb sat motionless in his truck, hands resting on the steering wheel. The concrete walls of the parking garage held the morning silence like a vault. He wasn't crying. His breathing remained steady. His mind worked like it did when examining structural problems, methodically breaking down each element, analyzing where the support had failed. 45 minutes passed as he sat there, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the dashboard. The divorce papers weren't a surprise. Not really. They were just confirmation of something his architect's eye had seen forming in the foundation years ago, hairline cracks that had been spreading beneath the surface while he kept trying to patch them over. What he needed now was his father. Walter Whitfield's quiet presence had always been the truest north in Caleb's life. A man who understood that some things needed to be said, and others just needed to be witnessed. The small bungalow in Orange Mound, where Walter had lived for 30 years, was the kind of place that expected nothing from you except honesty. Caleb pulled into his father's driveway just before noon. The familiar sight of Walter's old pickup truck parked in its usual spot provided a moment of comfort. But when he reached the front door, something was wrong. It was unlocked. Walter never left it unlocked. The wrongness deepened as Caleb stepped inside, calling out, "Dad?" He found Walter on the kitchen floor, one arm stretched toward the counter where his coffee mug sat, half full. The scene burned itself into Caleb's memory with architectural precision. The angle of morning light through the window, the worn linoleum pattern, the steady man who had raised him lying too still on a floor he'd walked across thousands of times. Caleb's hands didn't shake as he called 911. His voice remained clear as he gave the address. The paramedics arrived within minutes, their movements efficient, but already heavy with an understanding Caleb refused to accept. As they worked, Aunt Lorraine appeared in the doorway, her reading glasses still pushed up on her head like she'd left something in the middle to be there. The waiting room at Methodist East was painted in muted blues meant to be calming. Caleb filled out forms with the same steady precision he used for construction documentation. Lorraine sat beside him, her presence solid as a foundation wall. When the doctor appeared with that particular expression medical professionals practice for these moments, Caleb already knew. Walter Whitfield was pronounced dead at 11:47 a.m. Cardiac event. The same morning, the same day. The universe's timing had a brutality to it that Caleb filed away somewhere he couldn't examine yet, because there was too much that needed doing. He moved through the rest of the afternoon with hollow competence, his mind operating like it did on complex job sites, identifying what needed to happen next, executing each task with careful attention. He contacted the funeral home his father had prearranged with years ago. He called Walter's small circle of friends from the transit authority. He answered questions about arrangements with clear, considered responses. Lorraine watched him manage it all, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of how her nephew held himself together. As evening settled over Orange Mound, they sat at Walter's kitchen table, the same table where Caleb had eaten Sunday dinners his entire life. The house creaked softly, adjusting to its new emptiness. "Baby," Lorraine said finally, reaching across the worn tablecloth to cover Caleb's hand with her own. I need to tell you something I've been holding on to. She paused, choosing her words with the precision that was her hallmark. That woman never once asked what you wanted. Not once in 10 years. I watched. I counted. Caleb stared at their joined hands on the table's surface. The truth of his aunt's words settled into him like concrete being poured. Heavy, permanent, undeniable. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Later, he drove back to his house, the one he'd bought before the marriage, deed in his name alone. The night pressed against the windows as he moved through darkened rooms. Sleep wasn't even a consideration. At 4:47 a.m., he sat down at his drafting table and opened the South Memphis development drawings. His pencil moved across the paper with quiet certainty. This wasn't escape. This wasn't distraction. This was the thing that had always been fully his, the language he spoke before anyone asked him to be quiet. As the sun began to rise over Memphis, Caleb kept working, letting the clean lines and precise angles speak the truth his father had always known. Some men build, even when the world is falling down around them. Through his window, the morning light touched the edge of his drafting table. His hand remained steady. The work continued. 3 days after laying Walter to rest, Caleb sat across from Clara Weston in her cramped office off Lamar Avenue. The space felt lived in, with stacks of planning documents and zoning maps covering every surface. Sunlight filtered through blinds that had seen better days, casting strips of warmth across the drawings he'd spread across her desk. These revisions are exactly what we needed, Clara said, leaning forward to trace the line of the proposed courtyard with her finger. Her eyes moved methodically over the plans. Affordable housing units stacked above street-level commercial spaces, all arranged around a central gathering area that preserved the existing community rather than erasing it. The drawings represented 2 years of early mornings, sketching ideas while the rest of the world slept. Every line was precise, every measurement considered. It was the kind of work that came from understanding not just how buildings stood up, but how communities held together. The integration of the retail spaces with the residential units. It's seamless, Clara continued, and keeping the sightlines to the church steeple was brilliant. Shows we're building with the neighborhood, not over it. Caleb nodded, explaining quietly. The angle of the courtyard means every unit gets natural light, and the stepped design creates private balcony space without compromising security. His voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had solved these problems 100 times in his mind before putting them on paper. Clara looked up from the drawings, her expression shifting from professional assessment to something more direct. Caleb, I need you to stop doing this for free. I have a meeting with Jacqueline Burke's Community Investment Fund in 6 weeks. I want your name on the proposal as architect of record. The offer hung in the air between them. It was everything he'd been working toward without admitting he was working toward it. I need to think about it, he said, his voice steady. Think quickly, Clara replied. This project needs your vision, not just your consultation. Burke's fund is exactly the partner we've been waiting for. The drive home gave Caleb time to process. The house, his house, bought before the marriage, sat solid and waiting as he pulled into the driveway. He sat there for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and dialed the number Donna had given him. Priya Menon's office was nothing like Clara's. Everything was ordered, intentional, with the kind of precision Caleb recognized from his own drafting table. The attorney herself matched her space, methodical, direct, completely focused on the documents spread between them. 10 years of financial records tell a very clear story, Priya said, tapping a highlighted section. Your income primarily funded her education and your shared lifestyle. The professional credentials and community standing she accumulated, all of it was built on your financial foundation. Caleb nodded, unsurprised. He had always known the numbers. He just hadn't allowed himself to read what they meant. There's more, Priya continued, sliding another document forward. Over the past 3 years, $34,000 was moved from your joint savings into a private account in her name only. It's thoroughly documented and legally actionable. The revelation settled into Caleb like the sound of a level finding true. Not anger. Clarity. The house is solid, Priya added. Purchased before marriage. Deed in your name. Legally untouchable. Caleb sat back, letting the full picture form in his mind. For 10 years, he had been using his skills to build someone else's life. He knew how to build. He understood foundations, load-bearing walls, the precise way things had to be structured to stand. The divorce wasn't destroying anything. It was creating space. Standing in his driveway again, Caleb pulled out his phone and called Clara. His voice was quiet, but certain. Put my name on the proposal. After hanging up, he walked into the house and straight to the spare bedroom. The space had good bones, high ceilings, natural light from 2 windows. He could already see it. Drafting table centered under the north window, flat files along the east wall, reference books on built-in shelves. He drove to the hardware store, filled his truck with lumber and supplies. By evening, he was building the first set of shelves, measuring each cut with the same precision he brought to his drawings. The smell of fresh-cut wood filled the room as the studio began taking shape. Each shelf and surface an assertion of purpose. The work continued into the night, solid and steady, like his father had taught him. Build it right the first time. Make it last. The morning light filtered through the diner's windows as Caleb slid into the booth across from Donna Price. She had already ordered coffee for both of them. Black for her, cream for him. The way colleagues learn over 11 years of site meetings and project reviews. You're looking better, Donna said, studying him over the rim of her cup. Her direct gaze carried the weight of someone who had watched him navigate harder things than most people knew about. Getting there, Caleb replied, adding a packet of sugar to his coffee. Thanks for meeting early. I wanted to talk about that investment fund connection you mentioned, the one Clara's been trying to reach. Donna set her cup down carefully. We'll get to that. But first, I need to tell you something I've been carrying for too long. The waitress approached with menus. Donna waved her off with a practiced gesture. Caleb recognized the shift in her posture, the way she straightened slightly, the way her hands folded on the table. Whatever was coming had been rehearsed. 18 months ago, I saw Nadine at Marciano's downtown, Donna began. She was with a man. Not at the bar, not in the main dining room, in one of those corner booths with the high backs. The kind you request when you don't want to be seen. Caleb's expression didn't change. He waited. It wasn't a colleague dinner, Donna continued. I know what those look like. This was intimate. The way she leaned in, the way he touched her hand. I stood there for 5 minutes, watching, trying to decide if I should tell you. And you decided not to, Caleb said. Not an accusation, an observation. I wasn't certain. I only saw them from an angle. And you seemed, she paused, stable, managing. I didn't want to be the grenade in your life on a maybe. Donna reached for her phone, tapped through several screens. But then, last week, I saw this. She turned the phone toward him. The Memphis Methodist staff directory glowed on the screen. Her finger scrolled down to a photo and name. Dr. Brent Calloway, Department of Orthopedic Surgery. Transferred from Nashville Methodist 14 months ago, Donna said quietly. Senior attending physician there before that. Caleb absorbed this silently. The math was simple. Nadine's final residency rotation in Nashville, 2.5 years ago. Calloway would have been in a supervisory position. The timeline stretched back well before the divorce papers, through months of Caleb paying tuition bills and packing lunches, and believing in a future that was already gone. He took a slow sip of coffee. Were they obvious about it? After he transferred here? That's your only question? The only one that matters right now. Donna shook her head, a mixture of frustration and respect crossing her face. About the investment fund, Jacqueline Burke's group has been looking for exactly this kind of community-centered development. I can make the introduction this week. Thank you, Caleb said. That would help Clara's timeline significantly. That's all you're going to say? About any of this? Caleb looked out the window for a moment, then back at Donna. His voice was steady. What would saying more change? The question hung between them. Donna studied him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted from concern to understanding. This wasn't denial or suppression. This was discipline. I'll email Burke's office today, she said finally. You'll have a meeting date by Friday. I appreciate that. Caleb pulled out his wallet and placed money for both coffees on the table. I should get to the site. We're pouring concrete on the east foundation this morning. That evening, in his newly built studio, Caleb worked on the presentation drawings until midnight. Each line was crisp and intentional, each measurement precise. The community courtyard took shape under his pencil. Not just a space, but a statement about what could be built when someone understood both structure and people. He didn't mention Brent Calloway's name. Not that night. Not in the days that followed. When Clara's email arrived with the confirmed meeting date, he responded with professional efficiency and returned to his drafting table. The drawings demanded his full attention. He gave it without reservation. The proposal. The investment fund's conference room felt different from the usual construction site meetings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Memphis, and the long table gleamed like polished stone. Caleb adjusted his tie, the dark blue one Walter had given him 3 Christmases ago, and began laying out the drawings with Clara beside him. Jacqueline Burke entered with 2 fund associates. She was shorter than Caleb expected, but her presence filled the room immediately. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and carried herself with the authority of someone who had been evaluating million-dollar proposals for decades. Ms. Weston? She nodded to Clara, then turned to Caleb. Mr. Whitfield, show us what you've designed. Caleb unrolled the first drawing, the site plan that had taken shape across months of pre-dawn sessions at his kitchen table. His voice was steady as he walked them through the vision. 48 affordable housing units arranged around a central courtyard, street-level commercial spaces reserved for Black-owned businesses, community gardens integrated into the design rather than added as an afterthought. The existing properties, he explained, indicating specific sections, are incorporated rather than demolished. We're building around the community, not over it. Jacqueline studied the structural drawings intently. These support columns in the courtyard, how are you handling the load distribution with that span? Caleb didn't hesitate. We're using post-tensioned concrete beams with integral steel reinforcement. The loads transfer through a distributed grid system that allows for maximum open space while maintaining structural integrity. I can show you the calculations. He pulled out a detailed engineering analysis. Jacqueline's eyebrows rose slightly as she examined it. And the foundation considerations? This area has some soil stability challenges. We've designed a deep pile foundation system, Caleb replied, opening another drawing. 18 feet minimum depth, with additional reinforcement at these key points. His pencil touched specific locations. The geotechnical report confirmed we'll hit bedrock at 15 feet. We're going 3 feet beyond that for safety margin. One of the associates whispered something to Jacqueline. She nodded, then asked her final question. The community spaces. How are you managing security concerns without creating a fortress mentality? Caleb pulled out his most recent drawing, the one he'd finished at midnight 3 days ago. Natural surveillance principles, clear sight lines, strategic lighting, multiple access points that are visible but controlled. The courtyard design encourages constant community presence while maintaining defined boundaries. It's open, but not exposed. The room fell quiet as Jacqueline studied the drawings. Clara sat perfectly still beside Caleb. Finally, Jacqueline looked up. Initial funding approved, she said. We'll need final construction documents within 60 days. Mr. Whitfield, You'll be architect of record? Yes, Caleb said simply. Good. Let's get the paperwork started. The next week moved in parallel tracks. While Caleb and Clara signed the development agreement, Priya's office advanced the divorce proceedings. The discovery documentation landed with precise impact. Bank records showing $34,000 transferred from joint accounts to a private account in Nadine's name, spread across 3 years in careful increments. Nadine's attorneys pushed back, claiming the transfers were for legitimate expenses. Priya responded with annotated spreadsheets. The paper trail was unambiguous. During discovery, Caleb's architectural license and credentials became part of the formal record. The license earned at 27. The years of project management experience, the professional certifications. Credentials Nadine had never once asked about in 10 years of marriage. Then Terry called. Hey, Caleb? Nadine's younger brother started awkwardly. I heard about your father. I'm really sorry. Thank you, Terry, Caleb replied, sitting in his truck outside the construction site. I appreciate that. The conversation should have ended there, but Terry kept talking, his voice carrying the weight of something unspoken. Listen, he said finally. I need to tell you something. It's not. I just think you should know. Caleb waited. That last year, when Nadine was doing her residency rotation in Nashville, Terry paused. She was already telling us, the family, I mean, that she was planning to leave. Once she got licensed, she had it mapped out. 2 years ago, at least. The construction site hummed in the background. A cement truck backed up somewhere, its warning beep steady and mechanical. I see, Caleb said quietly. I'm sorry, Terry said. You're a good man, Caleb. You deserved better than that. Thank you for telling me, Terry. Caleb's voice was steady. Take care of yourself. He ended the call and sat in his truck, watching the cement truck pour its load into the foundation forms. 3 minutes passed. 5, 10. Then he started the engine and drove to the hardware store. He still needed trim pieces for the drafting studio's built-in storage. The studio was almost finished. He could complete it tonight if he worked late. The power saw hummed under his hands as he made precise cuts. Each piece fit exactly where it was meant to go. Title: While She Celebrates. The February dawn crept over Memphis like spilled coffee. Caleb's boots crunched on frozen gravel as he walked the South Memphis site, thermos in hand, breath visible in the pre-dawn air. Yellow construction lights cast long shadows across the foundation forms. He'd been here since 5 a.m., reviewing the day's poor schedule with the concrete crew. Mr. Whitfield? Carlos, the lead foreman, called out. We hit something unexpected in the northeast corner excavation. Caleb followed him to where the digger had exposed what looked like old utility infrastructure. Thick concrete, encasing what might be abandoned conduit. Let me see the site survey again, Caleb said, unrolling the drawings on the hood of Carlos's truck. He studied them for a moment, then pulled out his phone and pulled up city utility maps. We can redirect the foundation here and here, he indicated, sketching quickly on the drawings. Adjust the pile depth to 20 feet in this section to compensate. Carlos nodded. Most architects would have had to call 3 consultants and wait a week for that decision. Most architects haven't spent 10 years in construction management, Caleb replied with a slight smile. He'd learned to solve problems in real time, to see both the design vision and the practical path to achieving it. The sun was fully up now. More crews arrived. Electrical, plumbing, steel. Caleb moved between them, answering questions, adjusting plans, keeping the project moving forward. Clara had called him the best collaborator she'd worked with, but it wasn't collaboration so much as complete understanding. He knew what each trade needed because he'd worked alongside them for years. Mr. Whitfield? A young voice called out. Andre, the architecture student from the university program, stood nearby with his portfolio tucked under his arm. Is this a good time to review the section drawings? Come on, Caleb gestured toward the site office. Let's look at them together. Inside, Andre spread out his work. Careful hand drawings of building sections, surprisingly sophisticated for a third-year student. Caleb spent 45 minutes walking through them, explaining how theoretical designs translated to physical reality. "See how this beam connects?" Caleb pointed. "On paper it works. But in the field, you need to account for the welding access. Think about the person who has to make that connection 30 feet in the air." Andre absorbed everything, asking sharp questions. Caleb saw his younger self in the student's focused intensity. His phone buzzed, the Atlanta firm confirming next week's site visit. Their $9 million mixed-use project would be Whitfield Design Group's second major commission. Jacqueline Burke's introductions had opened doors Caleb hadn't even known existed 6 months ago. He didn't see the social media posts about Dr. Nadine Okafor and Dr. Brent Calloway at hospital fundraisers. He didn't follow their carefully curated appearances in medical society circles. He had deleted those apps months ago. His world had contracted to what mattered: the site, his drafting table, Sunday dinners with Aunt Lorraine where they talked about Walter and remembered him quietly. "Mr. Whitfield?" Another voice at the door. Ifeoma Adeyemi, the landscape architect, stood with her own set of drawings. "We need to discuss the courtyard dimension." Her tone suggested this wouldn't be a casual conversation. Ifeoma approached every design element with fierce precision. "These setbacks you've specified," she spread out her drawings. "They're wrong." "They meet code requirements," Caleb replied. "Code isn't the same as correct," she said flatly. "Look at the shadow studies. Your building heights will turn this courtyard into a wind tunnel 3 months of the year. The community garden spaces need more direct sunlight." She walked him through her calculations. Each point was specific, technical, and irritatingly well documented. "The structural grid is already set," Caleb argued. "Changing these dimensions means redesigning the support system." "Then redesign it," Ifeoma said simply. She wasn't being difficult. She was being right. After 12 hours on site, Caleb sat at his drafting table at home, Ifeoma's comments forcing him to reconsider the courtyard configuration. The redesign would mean late nights, but her analysis was correct. The space needed to serve the community, not just satisfy building code. He worked until midnight, rethinking the structural grid. Something in him responded to her directness, her willingness to challenge him purely on the technical merits. It had been years since anyone had treated his professional judgment as something worth arguing with. He admitted silently that she was right about the shadows. He wouldn't tell her that directly. But tomorrow, he would show her the revised drawings. The downtown law office lobby was all polished marble and hushed voices. Caleb sat quietly beside Priya, watching morning sunlight filter through vertical blinds. She reviewed documents with precise, unhurried movements, arranging them in careful sequence. "Remember," Priya said quietly, "let me do the talking. Your job is to sit there and be exactly who you are." The conference room was modern, designed to project neutrality: pale walls, dark furniture, abstract art that offended no one. Nadine arrived with her attorney, Richard Bennett, 5 minutes early. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost what Caleb used to make in 2 weeks of construction management. Her hair was smoothed into a perfect chignon, her makeup flawless. She carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who had already written the ending to this story. The mediator, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Holbrook, began with standard introductions. Bennett presented their position first. Given Nadine's imminent status as a high-earning physician and her contribution to the marriage's upward trajectory, they were seeking compensation equivalent to half the current assessed value of the house. Dr. Okafor's medical career represents a significant portion of the marriage's accumulated value, Bennett argued smoothly. Her future earning potential was built during these years with Mr. Whitfield's support, and that potential has material worth. Caleb watched Nadine's face as Bennett spoke. She sat with perfect posture, hands folded on the table, wearing the same expression she'd used when explaining complex diagnoses to patients' families. Warm, but authoritative. Someone accustomed to having her assessments accepted without question. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," Priya said when he finished. She opened her portfolio with deliberate calm. "I'd like to enter our complete financial disclosure into the record." She began laying out documents with surgical precision. "Mr. Whitfield is currently the architect of record on a $4.7 million community development project in South Memphis, funded through the Burke Community Investment Fund. He holds a second commission in Atlanta valued at $9 million. Whitfield Design Group has 2 additional contracts pending review, with combined projected value exceeding $5 million. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bennett's hand twitched toward the document. Nadine's perfect posture developed a slight rigidity. "Additionally," Priya continued, "we have documented the unauthorized diversion of $34,000 from joint savings accounts to a private account in Dr. Okafor's name over the past 3 years. The house in question was purchased by Mr. Whitfield before the marriage, with deed and mortgage solely in his name. His architectural license and construction management experience, previously deployed in service of supporting Dr. Okafor's education, are now generating significant professional advancement." She placed the final document on the table. "Given these factors, we believe Dr. Okafor's current position significantly overvalues her contribution relative to documented financial history." Bennett leaned toward Nadine, whispering urgently. Her composure showed its first crack, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible shift in her jaw. "We'd like to request a brief recess," Bennett said. The mediator nodded. Nadine and her attorney left quickly, their heads bent together in intense discussion. Priya gathered her documents with the same unhurried precision she'd used to present them. "Well done," she said quietly to Caleb. When mediation resumed 30 minutes later, Bennett presented a dramatically reduced settlement proposal. Priya reviewed it carefully, then shook her head once. "I'm afraid that's still not acceptable," she said. "Given the documented financial history and current circumstances, we'll need to revise further." The session ended without resolution. Caleb thanked Priya and the mediator, gathered his coat, and headed for the parking garage. He was almost to his truck when he heard footsteps behind him. "Caleb." He turned. Nadine stood there, her perfect composure fractured. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting, she looked smaller somehow. "You've been sitting on all of this?" she asked. "This whole time?" He looked at her for a long moment. The woman who had shared his bed for 10 years while planning her exit, who had taken his support and his sacrifice and never once looked past them to see what he was actually building. "Nadine," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the concrete echo chamber of the garage. "I was always building. You just never looked." The afternoon sun slanted through Aunt Lorraine's kitchen windows, casting warm rectangles on her worn linoleum floor. The smell of pot roast and cornbread filled the house. Sunday dinner, the way it had been for decades. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, watching Lorraine move between counter and stove with the easy rhythm of someone who had cooked in this space for 30 years. "You haven't touched your sweet tea," she said, glancing at his full glass. "That's not like you." "Just thinking," he replied. Lorraine turned from the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and studied him with the particular attention she reserved for moments when something needed saying. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "How are you?" she asked quietly. "Not the case, not the project. You." The simple directness of the question caught something in his chest. He looked down at his hands on the table. Builder's hands, architect's hands, capable of both precision and strength. For a moment, he couldn't speak. "I keep finding drawings," he said finally, his voice low. "In folders, in old notebooks. Things I sketched over the years and never showed anyone. Buildings I wanted to design, spaces I saw in my head. Every time I find another one, I remember exactly where I was when I drew it. What was happening that made me put it away? Lorraine didn't interrupt. She just watched him, letting the truth find its way out. There was always something else that needed doing, he continued. Another tuition payment, another rotation schedule to work around, another reason why my time wasn't mine. And I told myself it was fine, that supporting her dream was enough, that watching someone else build their life while yours stays in folders is what love looks like. His voice caught slightly. He took a breath. The day she got licensed, I had 3 different developers interested in meeting. Real opportunities, but I couldn't take any of them because she needed me available for her celebration dinner. So I put them in a folder too, like I always did. The kitchen was quiet, except for the slow bubbling of the pot on the stove. Sunlight caught the edge of his untouched glass, making prisms on the tablecloth. Last week, I found sketches from 2018, a community center design I did during my lunch breaks at the construction site. I remember being so excited about it. I showed it to her one night while she was studying. She glanced at it for maybe 3 seconds and said, "That's nice, honey," without really looking, then asked me to make her some tea and be quiet so she could focus. Lorraine's face held a complicated mix of anger and grief. "Why didn't you say something sooner, baby?" "Because saying it would have meant admitting how much it hurt," he said simply. And I wasn't ready to know that about myself. Or about her. He ran a hand over his face. 10 years, Aunt Lorraine. 10 years of putting every dream I had in folders while she built her life. And the whole time, she was already planning her exit. Already seeing someone else. Already decided I wasn't enough. Lorraine reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her palm was warm from cooking. "Listen to me," she said. "She's going to figure out what she walked away from. And by then, it won't matter." "How do you know?" "Because women like that don't know what they have until someone else wants it." Lorraine's voice held absolute certainty. "And by then, if you're smart, which you are, you'll be so far past her she won't even be able to see where you're standing." The drive home was quiet. Caleb thought about Ifeoma on the build site. The way she challenged every one of his design decisions with precise, technical arguments that forced him to defend his choices. The way she laughed without apology when she caught him in a logical inconsistency. The way she treated his professional opinion as something worth arguing with. He wasn't ready for anything. The divorce wasn't even final. But he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a kind of openness, like a door unlocking. He noted it, acknowledged it, and let it be what it was. Not an ending or a beginning, just a quiet shift in the light. The following week, the divorce was finalized with no drama, just clean paperwork and clear terms. The house remained his. The diverted assets were accounted for. Nadine accepted a modest settlement that reflected documented reality rather than her expectation. Caleb drove home from the attorney's office, changed into work clothes, and went directly to the build site. He worked until the sun set, losing himself in the precise satisfaction of seeing something real take shape under his hands. The mid-morning sun streamed through the windows of Roots Coffee in Midtown Memphis, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floor. Caleb arrived 5 minutes early, chose a corner table with clear sight lines to both exits, and ordered black coffee. His calmness surprised him. Not forced, just present. When Nadine walked in 14 months after their divorce, Caleb noticed 3 things immediately. Her perfectly pressed white coat, the slight tension in her shoulders, and something different in her eyes. The physician's composure was there, but underneath it lurked an expression he recognized from years of construction negotiation, someone who had run the numbers repeatedly, hoping for a different result. She ordered a cappuccino and sat across from him, placing her phone face down on the table. The gesture struck him as oddly vulnerable. Nadine always kept her phone visible, always ready for the next important message. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "Of course." His voice was neutral, pleasant even, the kind of tone you'd use with a former colleague. She took a careful sip of her coffee, then set it down with precise movement. I saw the Memphis Business Journal last month. The profile on the South Memphis development. The photos were beautiful. Thank you. And then, last week, the architecture record piece about the Atlanta Commission. She smiled slightly. $9 million is significant, Caleb. That's impressive work. It's good work, he agreed. The kind I always wanted to do. A small frown crossed her face. I always knew you had talent. Even back when… No, he cut in, his voice still even but firm. You never asked, Nadine. Not once in 10 years. You knew I was licensed. You knew I worked in construction. And you never asked what I was building or what I wanted to build. Not once. The frown deepened. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup like she needed the warmth. I thought you were content. You seemed… I was loyal, he said simply. That's not the same thing. The coffee shop hummed with quiet conversation and the whir of espresso machines. A barista called out someone's order. Nadine stared into her cup for a long moment. The courtyard design in South Memphis, she said finally. The community garden integration. That's not standard for affordable housing projects. You did that? The landscape architect did that. Ifeoma Adeyemi. She argued with me for 3 weeks about the dimensions. She was right. Something flickered across Nadine's face. Recognition, perhaps, of a name she'd seen in the articles. She took another sip of coffee, then set the cup down with a small click against the saucer. I've been thinking a lot lately, she said carefully, about choices, consequences, things I assumed versus things I actually knew. She looked up at him directly. I think I made a mistake. Caleb let the silence hold for a moment. The sun had shifted, throwing different shadows across their table. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but absolutely final. No, you made a decision. Several of them. Over several years. What you're calling a mistake now is just a decision that didn't turn out the way you planned. She started to speak, but he continued. You decided I wasn't enough while I was still making your lunch and paying your bills. You decided to start something with Brent while I was still funding your residency. You decided to tell your family about leaving 2 years before you handed me the papers. Those weren't mistakes, Nadine. They were choices. Clear ones. The coffee shop seemed very quiet now, though nothing had actually changed. Nadine's hands were still wrapped around her cup, but her knuckles had gone white. I don't know what you want me to say, she said softly. I don't want you to say anything, he replied. That's what you're not understanding. I'm not here for closure or explanation or whatever you thought this meeting was about. I'm here because you asked, and because I'm not afraid of sitting across a table from you anymore. He stood up, reaching for his jacket on the back of the chair. I hope the career goes well. I mean that. He walked out without looking back, the bell over the door chiming quietly as he left. In his truck, he pulled out his phone and called Ifeoma. Hey, he said when she answered. Still want to try that new Ethiopian place tonight? The late spring sun warmed the brick facade of the South Memphis development, casting a golden glow across the new building that seemed to highlight every careful detail. The crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony created a gentle buzz of excitement, neighbors and community members mixing with project stakeholders and local officials. Caleb stood slightly apart from the main group, taking in the finished structure with quiet satisfaction. 48 affordable housing units rose above 12 street-level commercial spaces, already occupied by Black-owned businesses, ranging from a bakery to a bookstore to a family medical practice. The central courtyard, with its carefully planned community garden, had already drawn residents out to plant early summer vegetables. At 41, Caleb carried himself with the earned confidence of someone who had built something real. His suit was well-tailored, but not flashy, the kind of subtle quality that spoke of careful choices rather than show. The Regional Architecture Award sitting on his drafting table back at the office meant less to him than the sight of children playing in the courtyard space that morning. Whitfield Design Group now occupied a renovated warehouse space in downtown Memphis, with a satellite office in Atlanta run by a 3-person team he had personally trained. The firm wasn't huge, but it was respected, the kind of respect that came from years of delivering excellent work and treating people right. They had a waiting list of potential clients, but Caleb still took time to mentor young architects like Andre, who now had his own desk in the Memphis office. Ifeoma moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her bright yellow dress a splash of sunshine against the brick. She stopped to explain features of the garden design to interested attendees, her hands moving expressively as she detailed the thoughtful integration of community needs into every aspect of the space. 14 months together. And she still challenged him daily, most recently over dinner last night, debating the merits of different approaches to sustainable urban development until the restaurant closed around them. Donna appeared at his elbow, squeezing his arm affectionately. "Another set of developers called me this week, asking about you," she said with a knowing smile. "I told them to get in line." "You don't have to keep sending referrals," he reminded her. "I know. I just like watching you turn them down." They shared a quiet laugh. Aunt Lorraine would be proud when she saw this at Sunday dinner. Their twice-monthly tradition now included Ifeoma, who had won Lorraine over completely by bringing homemade jollof rice and matching her straightforwardness comment for comment. Somewhere across town, Nadine was probably at Memphis Methodist, carrying on with a life that had turned out differently than she planned. The HR review into her relationship with Brent Calloway during her Nashville residency had concluded months ago. No dramatic firing, just a formal notation in her file, and a subtle cooling in her professional reception. Calloway's position had become similarly complicated. The whispered questions about supervisor-resident relationships, creating the kind of cloud that never quite dissipated. She was a good doctor. That had never been in question. But the gleaming new beginning she had designed, the prestigious position, the established surgeon partner, the warm welcome into Memphis Methodist's upper circles, had settled into something more ordinary and more difficult than she had imagined. The Midtown apartment was nice. The life in it was quieter than she had planned. A reporter from the Memphis Commercial Appeal approached Caleb with a notebook in hand. "Mr. Whitfield, what does this project mean to you?" Caleb looked at the building, at the families already making it home, at the small businesses setting up shop. "It means the people who built this city get to stay in it." The formal ceremony concluded as the sun began to set. Most of the crowd had dispersed, but Caleb remained in the courtyard, studying how the fading light played across the carefully chosen materials. Footsteps approached behind him, and Ifeoma appeared at his side, offering a glass of water. "You're proud," she said. "Not a question, but an observation." "I've been building toward this my whole life," he replied. She smiled, understanding completely. "I know. I read the blueprints." His answering smile reached his eyes fully, completely, the expression of a man standing exactly where he had always meant to be. Some men wait to be recognized. Caleb had stopped waiting long before she handed him the papers. He was already building. She just never asked to see the plans. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.